many students on the Eastern Illinois University campus have been promised MAP grants this year?
Approximately 2,300.
Okay. And do you know then, and right now, Eastern is fronting that money for those students, is that correct?
That's correct, about
Okay.
$7.6 million.
7.6 million, okay. Now, when well, let me say it a different way. We've talked a lot about reforms that we can do, and certainly all options should be on the table right now. Procurement reform has been something that's been discussed quite a bit. Have you had a chance to look at some procurement reforms and how much you think that your university would save if procurement reforms were instituted?
For our university, it would be approximately $500,000.
$500,000, okay. Now, the governor's proposal is a 20% cut to Eastern and the operating expenses for this year. Is that correct?
The governor's proposal was
17.
31.5 for 17,
For
which is
17.
20% from the fiscal year 15.
Right,
Yes.
okay. So you get 0 in 16 thus far.
That's
And
correct.
now you're looking at a 20% proposed cut for 17. Now, what does 20% come out to? How much less than in the 15?
It's about 400,000 per percent for EIU. So that'd be about $8 million.
Thank you. I'm not a university president, so I appreciate you doing the math for me. All right, so obviously not an offset, $8 million cut, but you could potentially get about $500,000 in gains through procurement reform. If this were to be instituted, even with procurement reforms, how would you make up the remaining $7.5 million of that cut?
Continuation of the efficiencies that we've had to do this year, as well as not be able to bring back these civil servants and other individuals that would be laid off, because that's a significant amount of money. Even though that they are essential to our operations, as I mentioned as I read my remarks, that we right-sized this university by taking that $10 and $12 million off the top when I first got there. 196 positions being eliminated.
Right.
Okay. These are positions that are critical to our operations. So if we were to take a 20% cut, we would have to be eliminating what I would say is beyond those, anything that would be soft cuts. These are very, very hard, critical individuals. So the only way that we can do that is obviously by increasing efficiencies, increasing revenue streams, and that's part of my enrollment integrative strategies that I'm putting in place to see an enrollment increase. For example, this spring we have the most international students that we have ever had on our campus. Our graduate programs are up from what they were last year, and as I already said, in the fall we had a 2% increase in freshmen.
Okay.
So we've got to be looking at our tuition enrollments.
Well, to make that up then, would you entertain an increase in tuition?
This fiscal year 2016, we had a 2.2% increase in tuition and fees. 2014, we had no increase whatsoever. And if we have any increase in fiscal year 2017, it would be nominal. So no, that's not the way that we would make up the money or the deficit that we would need. We have a strong commitment, as we always have, to be highly accessible, highly affordable for our students, and that will be continued.
You also indicated that Eastern has had an issue with declining enrollment in the last 5 or 10 years. Is
That's
that
correct.
Would increased tuition have an escalating effect on the decreasing enrollment as well? Do you estimate that if your tuition were to be increased, that would even exacerbate that problem and make it
I think
less
much of
likely
our
to-
enrollment decrease that we saw was based on demographics of the state and changing number of high school students.
Okay.
Also, not perhaps having the most strategic program array, which is being altered right now, and also not diversifying the learning or the learners that were out there who would like to have an Eastern education, such as those online or adult students, and we're making changes in order to accommodate that. So we believe that we'll have a nice influx of enrollments. Our price point, we think, is good.
Okay. So when you say efficiencies, increased efficiencies, we're really talking about personnel, right?
We're talking
more
about
cuts,
personnel
more
doing
furloughs.
more with less, yes.
Okay. Now, I appreciate your appearance before our committee uh, in Charleston, I believe it was October, late October, and you had, at that point, were doing all you could to kind of sound the alarm, even a few months into the impasse, and say, this is pretty serious, we need to address it. And at that point, I ask you, point blank, if you don't get any funds, how long can Eastern Illinois University operate? And at that point, I know you kind of gave us your best estimate at that point. Here we are 4 months later, 5 months later. If this continues, I mean, what is your estimate on that?
Well, as I said then, that we would make it through most of the spring without any challenges or making great sacrifices. And now we're in that point, and that's what has caused the layoffs, what has caused the furloughs, the contingencies that we need to put in place to continue throughout the rest of the semester, which we certainly will do, and graduate our students and so on. And then when fall starts to come, of course, there's tuition and fees that start to come in. So there's no day that one can say, when is that critical date? Okay. For us, we were going to do whatever is necessary in order to continue the great education that we provide our students and be accessible and affordable for these students to come. So we will continue to monitor it as time goes on and do what we have to do. Now, obviously, we feel that we're a partner of the state, and we're doing it better than anybody else for our constituency of students, and we're waiting, again, for the state to do their part and assist us in the education. We're talking about a $40 million appropriation here, approximately. And, we talk large sums of money, and I don't want to sound that $40 million is not a lot. It's a lot of money. But that $40 million is the difference between having a world-class education for students with a success rate that Eastern has been able to do and to impact and to create the leaders and entrepreneurs and educators and scientists that are going to take this state to greater heights. I cannot fathom how we have not been able to get our support from the state.
I recall I think it was the last thing you said at the hearing in October, where when I said, well, what will happen to those waiting to graduate, their juniors and seniors, if this, and your faith was strong then as well, that I think you said, I can't imagine that happening. And of course, we're 5 months later. I appreciate that your faith hasn't been devastated at this point in the state, and I apologize on behalf of the state for what you're going through. All these cuts that you've dealt with thus far, we hear a lot about administrative reform, and certainly I know the Senate did some studies on this last year. At this point, after all these layoffs, do you feel that there's any room for administrative reform that Eastern can do at this point?
I think that there is, and I think that we are willing to tackle that, and that we are willing to do what would be necessary in administrative reform, again, to continue the excellence that we have at EIU.
Okay. Thank you, President Glassman.
You bet.
Senator McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. You mentioned the rueful layoff of 177 employees, clerical, maintenance, groundskeepers, as you told me when we talked a couple weeks ago. Are you coming close to being forced to cut personnel on the academic side, whether they're in student support services, library staff, anything that touches teaching and learning?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even in the fall, we cut 29 faculty that were Unit B faculty, that is renewable contract faculty. We did not renew their contracts. We have A&P, or administrative and professional administrators, that are being not laid off, but are going on furlough, that affect advising, that affect librarians, and so on, and staff. So when a question came up earlier today about, is the map accessibility still in place, the answer is yes. But are the bridging and support services that we provide our students, are they being affected in the library, in advising, in other areas of the academic realm? The answer is yes.